It's an issue that was always going to be of concern for governments and businesses over the next couple of years, and is an important one for property investors and business people to understand. If there was a baby boom in the 1950s, and there was, then there is going to be a baby bust in the 2020s as baby boomers eventually exit the workforce. Now, it's not that us baby boomers are expected to die in droves over the coming decade, but it's more that we're going to be exiting the workforce at a faster rate than millennials and the other generations below them are entering the workforce. And this has, of course, only been made worse by our lockdown borders. We couldn't import more people over the pandemic. So to understand what this means for our economy and our property markets, today I'm going to be joined by leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, who's going to give us his insights into his latest research. He's going to explain to us what's ahead and what you can learn about it to help you become a more successful property investor. So welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Regular listeners would know I love my monthly catch-ups with Simon Kuestenmacher, Director of the Demographics Group and one of Australia's leading demographers, because I believe understanding demographics, how many of us there are, how we want to live, how we are going to live, and where we want to live is critical information if you want to become a successful property investor. In the long run, in my mind, these factors are going to be more important in determining which properties are going to outperform than the ups and downs of interest rates or fluctuations in government policies. So I was interested in a recent article by Simon in his weekly column in the New Daily about how record low birth rates are happening at the moment, and I was wondering about the implications of this moving forward. So welcome, Simon. I'm looking forward to chatting about this topic.
Great to be back, and it is one of my favorite topics, so you've chosen wisely.
Okay, well, Simon, it seems like we didn't have a baby boom after being locked down in COVID, but when we spoke about this at the beginning of COVID, that's exactly what you predicted, that we weren't going to have one.
Exactly. There were quite a few columns being published at the start of the first Corona lockdown, which was meant to be the only Corona lockdown, that suggested that in 9 months' time there was going to be a baby boom, as if the only thing we could think of in lockdowns was to...
I was wondering what word you were going to use.
Very good. Because in times of historic pandemics and historic economic downturns, we always had fewer rather than more kids, because we don't like the uncertainty of putting kids into the world. So therefore, we were a bit careful as humans. And now we reached, this is the spoiler alert, the lowest birth rate that we ever had in Australia. And it always remains to be seen how low can we go. We're now under 1.6 kids per woman. So that is very, very low. The replacement rate is 2.1 kids. So we say every woman needs to give birth statistically to 2.1 kids so that we just stay level with the population if there wasn't migration happening.
So it seems that we've got this very low birth rate, but it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, not at all. So if we look back to when we started collecting data in the 2030s or thereabouts, it was relatively low for those times at about 2.2, so just above the replacement rate, because this was the Great Depression. So you were quite unhappy and you didn't look too positively into the future. So it wasn't all that high. But ever since then, those numbers went up from the mid-30s up to probably 1960, 1961. We had really, really high birth rates, up to 3.5. So especially after the end of the Second World War, we had this famous baby boom where people felt confident. And there was a bit of pent-up demand for baby making because lots of the young men were away for a while fighting
during
overseas.
The war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we reached peak fertility rate at 3.5, 3.6 in 1961. Very, very high rates. This is, of course, when the baby boomer generation was born, which is why it's such a big generation, because the birth rate is so much higher than it is now. But then in 1961, things changed. The contraceptive pill was introduced. And that really led to a quick decline in the birth rate. Really dramatic, actually. And then in the...
It's actually interesting, Simon, because the younger generations wouldn't understand that way back, our parents, my parents, didn't actually have control of their fertility as much other than self-control.
No, exactly. You were kind of hoping you had a couple of calendars that you could rely on, and a couple of superstitious tricks that might have been applied. But really, that led to high birth rates. And you just had kids early on in life because your sexual interests probably emerged way before we now have families. So, in your 20s, in your teens.
So people were having kids much earlier, weren't they?
Oh, much, much earlier. And this is another reason for why birth rates are falling now is when you start having kids later in life, you just don't have enough time to add more kids. So that automatically drives the birth rates down.
Now, we're going back to history, and one of the things that changed was the contraceptive pill, but then there was another factor that happened in the 70s.
Oh, in the 70s, all of a sudden, we introduced no-fault divorce, where divorce was all of a sudden an opportunity, which wasn't the case beforehand.
Yes, it was much harder.
And so couples split up and they didn't add kids and didn't add second, third kids to the family. That drove the birth rate down. This, of course, the 60s, the 60s, 70s is when the Gen Xers were meant to be born. And the reason why this is such a small generation is because, you throw in Germany, we call it the anti-baby pill. So it's very, very direct phrase. The contraceptive pill in 61, no-fault divorce. So this Gen X generation never had a chance to get old. And they were actually growing up in a time with low migration intake. So Gen X is really small for this very reason. But after the 70s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, sexual revolution, and so on, we had a birth rate of around 2.7 or thereabouts. And that just quickly fell within the decade to 1.9. Just within 10 years, the steepest decline in a birth rate that we've seen happened just then. And then for about 2 decades, 3 decades, we inched around somewhere the 1.8 level of births in Australia. There was a tiny bit of a mini baby boom between 2004 and 14 or thereabouts. And some people say this was because of the baby bonus. There's no real statistical proof of this. I would argue the more likely explanation is that this was a time of massive economic boom, the mining boom, and in positive, optimistic outlooks, people have more kids. So the baby boom was probably just a donation to parents rather than a baby-making machine.
Right. But now we're at record lows of baby births.
Exactly. So this now dropped. A couple of reasons that play into this. So the birth rate always drops when you have more people living in cities rather than in rural areas. And so we further moved into the cities, more of our population. So that drives it down. Then the birth rate falls, the more highly educated women are. And so we now have women outperforming men on every level of education. So that really drives down the birth rate as well. Then if more and more of us are in education for longer, that means you just start having families later in life. And so all of a sudden, when you start having your first kid at 32, 33, 34, how many kids could you possibly squish into your family? So that limits it. And on top of this, and this is maybe a bit more of a intellectual argument, we live in ever smaller houses in Australia. So a young family can't easily afford a 4 or 5 bedroom house to have 3, 4, 5 kids, particularly not in the big cities where everybody's living. So therefore, that kind of sort of automatically limits the size of the standard family to 2 kids that you can easily squeeze into your home. So you wouldn't bet on much more to be produced by any couple.
Interesting. What comes first, the chicken or the egg?
That's right.
Okay, Simon, you write about a demographic time bomb. Now, related to this low birth rate, what are you worried about? What do you mean?
So we talk about demographic time bombs when you say you have no young people that you add to a country. Then over time, the share of the population that is old, that doesn't work anymore, that isn't economically productive, gets really big. That means that the smaller pool of workers need to finance an ever-growing pool of retirees. So this is a problem, which is why countries that cannot rely on migration, they really do whatever they can to push the birth rate up. We in Australia don't even need to worry about the birth rate all that much, as long as we remain an attractive destination for migrants. As long as we have enough migrants coming into the country, that's financially speaking probably a better deal, because as a state, we pay for a kid, before it was born up to the age of their first real job. We pay money for them. They are a net drain on the public coffers. So that is a bit of a, that's an expense. But then once you start pay taxes, you make up this cost that you created. But how about we take in migrants? Those are fully baked adults. They already come to us with professional skills. Some are even better. They're international students. They pay an arm and a leg to receive Australian education. And then by definition, they have the qualifications that we want them to have. And we then make them citizens and they right away pay tax. So it's an unbelievable scheme that we're running here. Very financially lucrative.
Very clever. But have we got the right skill mixture? Is there going to be a skills drought?
Yeah, so at the moment, and everyone who runs a business knows this, how incredibly hard it is to hire someone. We have an unemployment rate under 4. Western Australia has an unemployment rate under 2, which is ludicrous. So it's very, very unlikely that you can fill jobs with adequate candidates. And so the easiest way is to actually pay more money. That's the secret trick. If you have a skill shortage, you offer more money, then people will leave a job behind that they currently hold and they will take your job up. That's how, at least theoretically, businesses can react to this. But so far, we haven't seen a massive movement like this in Australia. So far, Aussies haven't really switched jobs in order to get higher pay and benefit from this skills shortage. I think this is the case because we have been treated very fairly by the JobKeeper payments, meaning we didn't need to lose our jobs during the pandemic. And that, I think, created a sense of loyalty towards our employers. And therefore, at least for now, not too many Australians are happy to jump ship. But that, of course, might change over time with the cost of living going up. Then people might feel the pressure to actually increase their incomes.
One of the interesting things from working from home, especially if you're not in the office at all, is it would be harder to create the culture and harder to create the loyalty. If I work from home for company A, I may as well work from home from company B. So where's the loyalty?
That's a good question. And of course, the skills transfer that we usually rely on with new recruits, with particularly the young people entering the workforce. Everyone who works in an office knows how much you learn from just quickly, wheeling your chair over to another desk and they'll explain to you how to use this system. They share little anecdotes of this and that business transaction in the past. And so knowledge is being handed over to the next generation in a very informal way. And now with more people working from home and doing this more regularly, businesses need to create really smart structural solutions to this. You want to create a couple more formal education sessions. This could be as simple as Excel 101 that you run with your newbies, or this and that software, this and that methodology, or Michael Yardney gives his staff tips about, how to trade property and so on.
Well, really interesting that you say that, because this afternoon, because we have 12 people offshore doing administrative jobs, and that's a very large office in the Philippines, we're actually running Friday afternoon drinks, the day of this recording, and games, and we've got a Cahoots game with a trivia quiz organised to bring people together. So those who can't physically come into the office, I'm trying hard to hold the culture of the company together.
And it's it's the way that we need to do things these days. We do need to be very flexible with this kind of change, because I don't think we can reasonably argue that this is completely going away. This will be with us. And that means that managers need to manage more. There is just more stuff that you need to be aware of. You need to really think about culture in a more deliberate way, and you then need to adjust your practices, and you will experiment. You will see whether your games are a success or not. If they are, repeat. If they're not, rethink. And this is how you find out what works in a new work environment.
That's right. So having looked at this research and seen what's going on, what lessons can we learn from the pandemic moving forward, Simon?
I think first and foremost, it's important to understand that Australia is really resilient. We were hit by fires and droughts and floods and locusts, whatever.
We're right. We've had a whole heap of things, haven't we?
We got so much stuff happening here. And whenever you see a news story like this, there is a Australian that's standing in front of his destroyed home that looks straight in the camera and says, we're going to rebuild. She'll be right. You always have this. And we have been doing this with the pandemic. We are very easy and happy to forgive and forget about pandemic mishaps. I'm seeing this in Melbourne, where people are very keen to just move on. And I'm now traveling to South Australia. I'm traveling to Western Australia, and I'm seeing people there. They have not, the pandemic seems to be more acute for them still at the moment, and not so much out of their mind just yet. But we will be getting there. And so that's positive. Plus, of course, we managed, from an economic perspective, we managed to get out of this all right on the other side. Of course, the negative news story here is that the further down you were on the income spectrum, the more likely you were to have lost your job, to were impacted in a negative way by the pandemic. So we drove the social divide of Australia further apart rather than bringing us, economically speaking, closer together. So that is something that needs attention, financial support. But by now, all of those people that lost their job during the pandemic, in this pressurized environment that we're in today, they will find employment again.
Now, over the years prior to the pandemic, we convinced ourselves we should focus on what we're doing best: mining, agriculture, housing, lifestyle, and just outsource the other things to overseas. But I think the pandemic demonstrated we can't rely on the free flow of goods, services, even people, tourists, students, workers, migrants. They were all shut off.
Yeah. And so this is, again, an effect that comes from two sides. One is that we saw the global supply chain being pressurized during COVID because lots and lots of factories were shut down. Then lots and lots of harbors couldn't operate at the same rate that they were before. And at the same time, people ordered more stuff online. So you have a decreased capacity in the system and increased demand that creates bottlenecks. That's a problem. On top of all of this, you now have a war in the Ukraine that makes the supply of certain goods harder. And you have the general geopolitical context where, America first, where America isn't quite as happy as they were used to be to play the global sheriff role on the oceans to ensure that free trade can flow beautifully and easily between countries. So we're seeing a general slowdown, not a cancellation, but a slowdown of global free trade, of globalization, and we now need to deal with this. The two obvious changes that we will make is we'll try to double down on agriculture, and we'll try to make sure we manufacture more of the essentials in Australia. We will not become a high-tech country. I think stuff like medicine is an obvious one where we'll double down medicine and medical equipment. We will double down apparently on anything space related. We're willing to put real money into that, and a bit of advanced. Adelaide will get lots of the space dollars happening.
And submarines.
And submarines, exactly. So all of this is happening. We're adjusting to this. So this means reshoring of jobs that were probably going to have gone to overseas otherwise. So that is positive. But the bad news here is that the imports will continue to go up in price. And so if you look at your business, if you look at your industry, lots and lots of the cost of doing business is just stuff that you need to buy. If you build a house, lots of the equipment in Australia is shipped in from overseas, and those goods will only go up in price.
Well, we learned this over the last months, haven't we? All the building companies have learned how much wood is being brought from overseas. I would have thought with all the trees, you just drive anywhere that we would be self-sufficient in timber. We're not. In steel, we're not. And toilets and basins and taps is all being coming in from overseas. So we need to be more self-sufficient moving forward, but clearly just because of our size of 25 million people, we don't have enough critical mass for certain industries.
Correct. And so therefore all the high-tech stuff, all the really complex stuff will be continued to be produced overseas, and we will continue to import this stuff.
What about agriculture? Because are we going to be the food bowl of Southeast Asia or the rest of the world?
Absolutely. Agriculture is in for a big fat decade. You had the world's largest wheat producer attack the world's fourth largest wheat producer in the Ukraine, Russia attacking Ukraine. That's problematic. That means, though, and there's all those stories were written about how this will push world hunger forward. It's tragic stuff. But if you are a cold-hearted capitalist in Australia, you can just say the food prices, this is the stuff that we export, they go up like crazy. All the stuff that we dig out of the ground go up in price like crazy. So we create enough wealth in Australia that we can continue to afford to import stuff, even though that stuff is going up in price.
But it is a bit odd that we have oil in the ground, we have gas in the ground, and yet we're running short.
Yeah. And it's the mismatch of demand. It's the mismatch of how supply chains work. You're now seeing more and more big projects coming online where you want to do the value adding to your raw materials in the country rather than at the export destination. So that's difficult. A difficult change because that means massive capital investment. God knows at the moment capital is around and money is available to build stuff. So that is helpful. But we do need to invest big in order to prepare for the next couple of years.
So despite not making as many babies as we did in the past, demographics is showing us that we're going to have a large population growth, as we discussed in last month's podcast, that we're going to be importing people and we're going to keep our economy ticking over. We're going to have people who are skilled being able to provide the services and pay the taxes. But it'll be a different decade. It'll be interesting to look back in 10 years' time and see what happens. Because we're actually, I guess, I remember when we became 2020, we're moving ahead, and it'll be interesting to see what life's going to be like in 2030.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I do for a living, is this looking ahead. And overall, I don't see reasons to be pessimistic. I see quite a few roadblocks on the way, but we will capture those, we'll tackle those as we reach them.
Well, I think you said it smartly, that we've got a history of responding well to global calamities, to local calamities, and we are regarded as a safe haven, and migrants and others are going to want to keep coming to Australia. That's going to underpin our economy and the wealth. And as long as our population is growing and we remain a wealthy nation, that's going to support property values. That's going to be more important. As I started talking about this at the beginning of this podcast, understanding demographics is going to help us understand what properties are going to be in continuous strong demand moving forward. And if we're wealthy and we want to live in these lovely cities, we're going to be able to afford to pay more, while there's lots of countries where people want to live like this but just can't afford to.
Exactly. And so the more and more you have what are called transnational and temporary populations, meaning migrants, and some of them might purposefully only be here on a temporary basis, all those folks will need housing, and they will not purchase housing. So the groups of people that want to rent homes overall should actually increase. And these people rely on investors to offer housing stock to them. So we can't just run a scheme where everybody owns the house. That doesn't make sense. So you do need a fair chunk of the housing stock to be available to the rental market.
And that's going to, in Australia, depend upon the private sector. The government's having enough trouble supplying the social housing needs, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I do see a scenario. I don't think it's a likely scenario where states in Australia interact as developers on the housing market, where they really double down on social housing, on key worker housing, at providing housing for low-income workers in high-cost suburbs in order to make sure that those areas have relevant workers there. But quite frankly, I think that is probably still a decade away before any government really creates a feasible solution like this.
It works overseas, but somehow or other doesn't seem to fit in with the way we do things here. So, Simon, thank you for those great insights. Once again, it's interesting to study demographics, and you've given us a little bit of an insight using a crystal ball of what's ahead. Look forward to catching up with you again next month.
Fantastic. Catch you in a month.
In a moment, I'm going to be sharing my popular mindset message with you. But just following on with my chat with Simon, you can see that it's really critical to understand demographics and how they're going to change, but importantly, how they're going to affect markets. And that's part of the detailed research we do at Metropole to help our clients outperform the averages. So if you're thinking about adding to your property portfolio, and even if you're thinking about buying a home, if you're like most home buyers, your current home, your new home is not going to be your forever home, so you really should be thinking about it like an investor. So if you're thinking about adding to your portfolio or buying a home, why not get the team at Metropole and our research behind you? Because the world is changing in front of our eyes. The property markets are going to be very, very different moving forward. But we're doing the hard yards to get the information to find out where markets are going to outperform, not just in the short term. That's not as valuable as in the long term. We're committed to helping you using the frameworks that I have developed and the strategies I've built over 5 decades and that we've been helping clients with for over 20 years. In fact, our audited results show that Metropole's clients are 7.3 times more likely to own 6 or more properties than the average property investor. So why not book your complimentary, obligation-free chat with one of my team? Go to metropole.com.au, find out about what we do, and I don't know which of our services would suit you, but my team will have a chat because we have wealth advisory, property management, buyer's agency, financial planning, property strategy, business advisory. But for almost everybody, it starts by putting a plan together, bringing your future into the present and planning for you to become the person you plan to become. And then we'll help you implement that plan. So if you're wanting to grow your wealth through property, go to metropole.com.au. I'd love to be part of your wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's Mindset Moment, I'd like to talk about 7 things you can't control. Now, this came from a blog I read recently, and I'll give you the list that the blogger came up with, and I'll give you some of my thoughts. But currently, a lot of people are feeling stressed, they're feeling worried, they're feeling nervous because there's lots of things out of their control that are going a little bit haywire, aren't they? And I'm sure you've heard it said that it's better to control the things you can control, worry about the things you can control, and don't spend too much time worrying about things that are out of your control because you can't do anything about them anyway, can you? Well, with that in mind, let's have a look at this list of 7 things you can't control that I just recently read, and I'll give you some thoughts. The first one was time, and I guess that's interesting. You can't control time, and I guess one day you're going to wake up and realise there just isn't enough of it left. So I guess my suggestion is don't waste your energy and time on things that are not worthwhile, that are not going to get you to where you want to go, or on forced interactions with people that you don't like. Be selective what you do with time, because you can regain your money, but you can't regain your time. The other thing on this list of 7 things that I just recently read was other people's reactions. You can't control other people's reactions. And they're right there. I guess my thought would be never trade your own authenticity for approval of other people. Try to make everybody happy. Well, that's a soul-draining exercise. It's going to leave you feeling empty. So instead, invest your energy and your time, like we said in point 1, in people who do matter to you. The third thing on this list of 7 things you can't control is being richer than somebody else. I guess the author was saying something along the lines of, you're never going to be satisfied if you've got more money, because money on its own is worthless. So you can't control how much richer or less rich you are than other people. Having money is only valuable because it can help you get something you want. Money is meant to be exchanged, so use it to connect with people, invest in, experiences that you're going to enjoy. Of course, you've heard me say before that true wealth has nothing to do with money. You need your health, you need time, you need people around you to love you and appreciate you and somebody for you to love. You need to be able to grow, you need to be able to give back to the community. So, no, you can't control your wealth compared to other people. And by the way, don't compare yourself with other people, because the things you see on Instagram and Facebook aren't real. You're seeing the show reels like they do in the movies, not all the bits on the cutting room floor. The fourth thing you can't control, this list said, was you can't expect there to be a day when those who've hurt you suddenly show up and apologize. Now, that's a good one, because I know a lot of us do hold on to anger, but all it does is it prolongs your own pain, it prolongs your own unhappiness. So learn to forgive, because you deserve the peace, not them. Just leave them alone and move on. The fifth thing you can't control is overthinking, because sometimes when you do think too much, you can create problems that aren't even there. So that was on this blogger's list of things you can't control. I think you should control it. You shouldn't be overthinking. Focus your imagination on things that are brilliant, that make you feel good, not on all the problems and the challenges that are there. But I do agree that the sixth thing on his list, the world around you, you can't control that. Now, I know when I was young, I wanted to change the world. I had all these ideas and ambitions. And then I realized the world changed when I did. And the last of the 7 things on this list of things you can't control is your past. You can't restart the next chapter of your life if you keep reading the last old one. No matter how dirty your past is, your future is spotless. So thank your past for all the lessons it's given you, acknowledge how it strengthened you, and then move on with your life. So there you go. 7 things you can't control, so don't worry about them and move on and take control of the things that are under your influence. Well, thanks for spending the last half an hour or so with me and with Simon Kuestenmacher. And you can see why I delve into demographics, because it's one of the main factors that are going to drive our property markets moving forward. And it's critical for all property investors, business people and entrepreneurs to understand. So if you got some benefit from today's show and you know someone else who will benefit from it, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. By the way, in every podcast app, there's a little button down the bottom somewhere which allows you just to share it. Tell somebody about it, or tell them in the old-fashioned way. Or, of course, you can tell the world by leaving a review. We always love getting those as well. So I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me in between these shows on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update private Facebook group, where every day I leave some charts, some information, something you won't get elsewhere that'll help you in your journey as a property investor. I've got a bonus for you just for listening to this show. So go to podcastbonus.com.au, leave us your details, and you can get a bundle of new ebooks and reports. I've updated a couple of those reports recently too. As I said, I'll be back again real soon. Have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?